these issues are so hot in my community that if I even raise a voice and say no, this book is not obscene, I can be fired.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the TF Cast. I'm Willis.
Hey, we got Grum here. It is August 23rd, 2023 here in the solarium.
And I am your host, Jacob Bases. Today with us, we have author Geoff Herbach, who is the author of the young adult fiction novel Hooper that has recently come up on a list of books to be reviewed in Iowa for, I believe, sexual content. But we'll get to all of that. Geoff, if you could just introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about yourself and the book and your experience learning about this.
Yeah. So I'm Geoff Herbach, and I've been writing. For a decade, I think I wrote primarily young adult novels and tried to do big voices or interesting voices that would appeal to kids who aren't necessarily readers. So it's been kind of my mission to reach out to kids who don't like reading and give them things that they might like. So they tend to be, some humor, some funny stuff, and then sports or major sort of dramatic clashes between people in band or something like that. Yeah. So the book Hooper is a basketball book. And I'm a fan of basketball. I'm actually a very short person, so never was particularly good at the game, but I really love it, and having an opportunity to study it and take apart how the game works was excellent. And the thing I love to do is to be able to write that kind of thing in a way that is entertaining. And will then pull kids from that kind of gateway of sport or dumbass humor into thinking about societal issues or something deeper than that sort of superficial candy level on the top. I thought Hooper was my sweetest and least controversial project ever. There is there's a sort of a lot of family love in the book, and sort of a sweet kind of outlook on how things could turn out if kids are kind to each other. So it was shocking to get a message the other day that the book was on the front page of the Des Moines Register as one of a bunch getting challenged in the state of Iowa under this new law, which is an obscenity law meant to protect kids from the evils of sex, I guess.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to just take a minute to go read the thing, it's the bill is 496 in Iowa, and you can. It is a very broadly defined book about how schools are going to interact with sexual content and anything regarding gender, and just generally, it says almost nothing about what the book's content can be. It says there is not to be sexual content in the book if it's in a library, and to just say sexual content is a little bit absurd. And a funny story about how I approached this was I thought that this was about the kind of like Texas and Tennessee style bills, where a big thing that they had been going after was like how white people might be made to feel guilty about their race. And when I read the book, I went and highlighted every passage about race. And then I read the actual bill after I read the book, and the bill just said no sexual content. And there is two scenes in the book where maybe 3 where there's kissing.
Yeah.
And I believe there's one hand on the leg too.
That's right.
Uh,
Dangerous.
Yeah, very dangerous.
Whoa. So I didn't mean to make light of the sexual content earlier in the introduction, but it just is like I laughed when I read the bill. I was like, it just simply doesn't exist in the book.
No.
And the book does make some. It is a compelling story that deals with race. So there is some good stuff in there. Like if you want to, give your kids something to read where someone is kind of pushing up against, a child learning about how race works in America. There is some of that in this book, and I think it's a good message. But it wasn't for that, which is like really sad. That it was just for any mention of sexuality. How does this kind of behavior resonate within like you're a teacher and a writer, and you're educating new writers, I presume. Like, what's the feeling?
Like this kind of wave of book banning that feels like the epicenter was, sort of the DeSantis, Florida moves in the last 6 months, and then Texas and Tennessee are both quickly following suit, and it's and Iowa, so it's kind of new. What's interesting is that the fear in the writing community, I think, has often been that their left-wing allies would see what they're writing as somehow crossing a line and being tone deaf, or they're not getting it, and so that it would be, pushback from the left that would take out somebody whose, intention is not to be offensive, and so this sort of like swing around from the right. Is kind of new, and I am real curious to see students this semester deal with it for the first time. We've had a lot of conversations about how authorship and identity is a real part of the creative process, and that these are good conversations to be having. And getting a well-tuned ear for what is great art to make for you, and where you have like authority to speak on issues. That's been a conversation that we've been having, I feel like, for 5, 6, 7 years, longer probably, and without fear that we just thought the people on the right don't read, so it doesn't really matter. So I've gotten complaint emails from parents before, because in my early books I dropped the F-bomb a lot, and they would say things like, "I can hear kids say this word, but do we have to read it in a book?" And I'd think, I'm not writing for you. I'm writing for the kids who are, are hearing themselves reflected back in literature. So it's kind of a surprise. It's kind of this stuff happened a long time ago. It happened all the time. It happened in the 80s. It happened in sort of like Tipper Gore's world. And now it's swinging back through, but it feels like there's something more dangerous about the legislative push happening now, that isn't just wacky people burning books, but it's being institutionalized, and so I'm not quite sure how to react yet.
Yeah. And I would once again encourage everyone to just read the bill. It's $249 out of Iowa. 294. 496. I said the number wrong 3 times in a row. It is 496, and it is just a largely it is a bill to stop trans kids from existing.
Yep.
Just generally, that's what the point is. There's also a lot of things that would prohibit teachers from allowing to check up on their kids, ask how they're doing mentally, or like if they use any kind of other pronouns than what's on their birth certificate, they have to report that to the parents immediately. It just is very transparently like one of these anti-trans pieces of the legislation that's been going on in this culture war, and it just has this very a bunch of very famous pieces of literature have also gotten caught up in this. Things that have widely, because I mean sexual content is just like whatever, and also it does just say any conversation about gender. And I think that has such a poor understanding of what it is. Like you can't not express gender. It just simply doesn't. Like how could this law even be enforced? I mean, it's happening to you, but like, what does the broad application of it, really look like?
God.
Yeah, and like, excuse me. What also does that count? Like, if you're doing it for a joke, like the countless Disney films where like a guy's wearing a dress, but it's like in jest, is that still like considered like gender, or like playing with gender? And it's also weird to me too, because to me, text seems like the safest way to encounter any of these concepts. Like there's no picture, it's not like happening. Like I don't know. It's a very strange thing to me.
I mean, that's my first response is like, I have kids who come to my office because they're addicted to pornography on their phone and they can't stop looking at it in class. And you're concerned about, maybe you should stop. Maybe you should stop paying for your kid's smartphone. Right. It's so out of whack with how things actually work in our world.
Well, I mean, that was another takeaway from the book itself. Is I was like, I just don't know how you couldn't have written the book like without having described the characters. Like, you can't just exist in a world where like you would have had to just describe the situations like a legal document for it to be any more. But speaking about what is just out there, like it is so strange to go after literature to me because it is all just available. Like any amount of like depravity or smut is like, it's like just in Google. It's so accessible.
That's I had a girl actually, say to me a couple years ago. She's like, my bedroom is a whorehouse. My bathroom is a whorehouse. My everywhere I go is a whorehouse because I've got this phone and it just I just want to die. And I'm like, can you stop looking? And she's like, no. That I so we went to the counseling center. But that that's where concern should lie. It seems to me. I mean, that's where her pain was there, not in a book.
Have you ever heard of students complaining about the content of books? And if so, like what were the situations where that happened?
A couple of years ago, I think my colleagues are pretty good at saying to people, listen, there's a scene in this book that that could be upsetting to people if you want to talk about it ahead of time, or if you need to skip it, that's understandable. I've had one person complain about how graphic can I be?
Oh, you can say whatever.
All right.
Let it rip.
Yeah, in the book The Sympathizer, really cool book about a Vietnamese man who was worked for the American government during the Vietnam War, but he does masturbate with a squid at a certain point, and I had a kid in class be like, "Oh, I can't, I can't deal," and complain about the choice of book. It's an amazing book, so I
and
have
that's
to get
a
better.
college level course, right?
Yeah, it's a college level course.
We had a previous guest who was teaching an AP class in high school, and they had a poem that I think described like there was like some mention of cum in the poem. and like basically like grassroots, like, you know, right-wing fear mongers got a hold of this, and then they made a media campaign against this high school
Yeah.
teacher for this AP class,
Wow.
and said that she was like hosting furry orgies and stuff, like just totally like off the wall stuff. But it is really interesting that a lot of this culture war stuff is happening at the school level, because it is very, very small government. Like with in Mankato here, you know, our school board elections are won by a handful of votes, and like these people can really affect change. And like, you know, for you, I feel like, you know, your book being on a banned list might actually get some more people to read it in some cases.
I had so many messages of congratulations that came through after that was posted.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so it, you know, my morning started out just, I was furious, but by the afternoon, I'm like, that's pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I think you made $11 off me.
All right.
But the people who are really probably gonna have the hard day to day is the teachers who don't know if they can, you know, check in on their kids, or, I'm hoping that as an educator, maybe, and as an educator of educators, you could fill in on what the mood is. Like you said earlier about how the person who reached out to you, like, didn't even want to be.
Yeah. So this is, so I think maybe a reason why the book is even on radars in Iowa is I've done a lot of school visits in Iowa. And so, you know, you get invited as an author by librarians. So this is somebody that I had worked with in the past who sent me a message after the book came out, and she's like, I can't, these issues are so hot in my community that if I even raise a voice, and, you know, and say, no, this book is not obscene, I can be fired. That, you know, that she felt so like stunted, her inability to express, like, is such a big deal, that she, you know, she's like, I can't even come out in support of books that I know don't match the intent of an obscenity law, for fear that it's going to swing back around and I'm going to lose my job, and I can't lose my job. And so there is, you know, enormous fear. And that's, you know, so I feel like we've moved from a time where we had people shouting from the right to a place where people are acting and like really harming, you know, kids and the adults who, you know, care deeply about them and want to help them have good lives. So yeah, it's a scary moment.
It sounds like in that you're kind of speaking to the difficulty that, and you mentioned this too, Jacob, where it's becoming difficult to even advocate for what you see as being right because of the fear of backlash. So it kind of like enforces the culture of like silence, and there's like nothing, there's very little you can do to change the minds of someone who might be making that decision about like, oh, should this book be banned or should it not? Like you it's almost like you can't say anything about it.
Yeah, so you can't engage in the conversation. There's how do you change minds, or how do you educate if you can't engage in the conversation?
And the law sort of specifically talks about how like educators can't like ask their, you know, almost inquire with their students about how they're responding to these things either. And so to your point about like the problem just being very apparently in digital media and like the easy accessible stuff, like I don't know if that's something that you also can't talk about, but those are the questions being raised, and it seems like there might be limited situations where there's concern about the literary content, but definite like clear concerns about the digital content.
Yeah. I think it's almost just generally silly to like try too hard to withhold any sort of experience from your kids, and it's more because like I grew up like a single mother household, only child. 90% of what I did with my time was go on the internet. Like I think I understand it from an idealistic standpoint, and I do understand that we need to intervene if people are like directly like showing something pornographic on in a classroom. But it's just strange to me to even think like you can withhold like all sexual content from your child. It's just silly, honestly.
Well, and the depictions of sexuality are often like not hot, you know.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
some of this is like, oh, like I know a lot of it that has come up has been like this person experienced a sexual assault, and it's like it's the theme of the book, and like this is stuff that happens to kids, you know. So they should know. I think that the progressive stance on sex education is that if they know, they can report.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you know, also just in terms of the internet, like the internet still is an awful place to be in general, but also like in the age of like the internet's like puberty when like millennials were coming up, like
Yeah.
it was like almost everyone I know has like some memory of going to like rotten.com or just something truly horrific and
Yeah.
seeing like actual videos of like people being killed or something. And that was just on the open internet.
Yeah,
back
because you just
then.
keep pushing the line. You just keep like being like, oh man, boobs. I never thought you could look up boobs on the internet. How far does that go? And like, it's I don't know. I guess I'm just reiterating.
Really unlocking stuff for
Yeah,
people over
there
those
are
acts.
boobs on the internet.
There.
If you didn't know.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys knew that, but it's like same place you are right now. You can do that, but
Yeah, and you're choosing to watch this podcast. Thanks.
but yeah, I especially with like the disenfranchising of like what teachers can do in the first place and access to money and like having to use their own money to supplement anything that that they see of value that's not already provided. It seems like it would be really frustrating to be in that position. What's kind of your reaction? Not that you're allowed to share to like this idea that of like withholding information from students in the first place, I guess.
Yeah, I'm. You know, I teach college,
Yeah.
and I want students to feel like the classroom is a safe space.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's a bottom line. And so, you know, if there is anything that I feel might make a kid uncomfortable in my class, I'll let them know in advance that this is coming. And so, but given that, I feel like I should be able to talk about anything. I mean, I teach creative writing. It's the entire world that we filter through, you know, ourselves as artists and make something out of. And this includes, you know, your experience with rotten.com. We should be able to talk about that in the classroom and how it impacts, you know, our sense of well-being, our psychology, our, you know, our art making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Triple Balls is a media and event production company based in southern Minnesota. We specialize in multicam live streaming and sound and lighting for event productions. Contact us today to learn more or subscribe online to join our newsletter and stay up to date about events and things going on in the area. Thanks for tuning in. Back to your show.
I think that a lot of this right-wing backlash stuff is largely because of like the honesty that we've come to as like a nation more recently. Like it's difficult for people to like look at things like I mean a hot one right now is the atomic bomb because Oppenheimer just came out. Like most people are like, oh, that was horrifically evil. Like how can we have national pride when like basically everyone says we shouldn't have done this thing and it was ineffective and it was genocidal and blah 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 blah. And like, you know, it wasn't like that when I was in grade school. Like I didn't hear that.
Yep.
And now that's just like out there. And it's hard to put back in the bottle. And I mean, we shouldn't.
Yeah.
But what do you know, that's what freedom of information has done.
Well, yeah, and you know, like the the white guilt, right? So just talking about white guilt, well, it makes us feel, badly about our country. And if we feel badly about our country, we stop being on the same page and we can't move forward. There, why not be proud of the fact that we can talk about those things? That's like the American experiment, is that we can express, right?
Yeah.
And so, having like trying to build momentum and community and like body politic around expression rather than the you're hurting our sense of well-being by saying that we've done bad stuff in the past. It's just antithetical to what the American experiment's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The sweep it under the rug and like don't talk about it kind of thing seems obvious that would have negative downstream effects. Like that, I mean, it's a big part of like why we're having the conversation in the first place. And if the solution's to like, well, we'll keep like not talking about that and move forward with a strong sense of civic pride.
Yeah.
What devastation is to come for us not having talked, we cannot learn from our history. We must move forward, punching through to the future. Yeah.
Well, the thing, the horror that I don't want to live in is, of course, like having like this, personal life where I feel like I'm interfacing with reality, where I can like have a clear view of history and I can talk to people who have a good understanding of it, and then be like, oh, but in the professional world, like I have to pretend that like people don't have, aren't experiencing this reckoning, or that like, they're like gender is a strict binary or something like that, where I have to like constantly switch in between. And it's hilarious because, for all the culture war complaining about like what it was like to live under the guise of like the Communist Party or something. It's like, this is actual thought police behavior. Like
straight up, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, you don't ask them how they're feeling. Like they might be feeling a little gay today. Like
who of us have not woken up in the morning? That's right. So you can't, in order to keep your position in a company, you have to pretend. Or like even worse, in the school district, you have to pretend that what isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of life is that?
Yeah. And it is this kind of like real push to get parents to audit things. Like they want to put a parent somewhere. Like they've talked about putting cameras in some classrooms, or like allowing any parent to sit in at any time in any classroom. And it's like, how good, like just imagine if that like was widely adopted. Like parents are just gonna go and sit in and raise their hand every few seconds and needle your lesson plan apart.
Oh my god! Imagine if they were like doing that
episode
at like any other profession. It's just crazy to even think about. Like you didn't go to school for education. I don't know why it's anything past that.
But I think that as I don't have like a whole bunch else to say, except that people should look into it. When it comes to this particular law, and like just make sure that it's not happening here. Like I've said it before on this podcast. Like pay attention to your school board, because I promise you right now there are people with like big money who are trying to influence our school board members in this community.
Yeah.
Like I promise you.
Yeah.
And they're telling parents that they're trying to steal your kids and give them surgery and all kinds of stuff.
That's the craziest thing was when we talked to our friend Jenny, a lot of the people that were writing in weren't even people who had experienced this or had kids who had experienced this. It was people that had heard from one news source that this was happening and then immediately wrote the school board, endangering someone's like livelihood and ability to keep like paying for her family because of they heard ridiculous information from one news source. Yeah. And I'm sure that's a lot with a lot of this stuff. Like even just hearing that, the school isn't getting rid of a banned book. All people hear is like, there's something banned that they're not getting rid of. I don't know if that's a great way to explain what I'm saying, but people just hear these things and they just go along with it just because like they're so scared of them without even actually figuring out what information is like actually being shared.
Well-
It's like responding to a headline, and the headline may or may not even be
Yeah, yeah.
relevant.
When I'm talking about this astroturfing, so in the case of Jenny, there is a group here in Mankato called Child Protection League Action, and they fund a bunch of anti like LGBT stuff, and they had found people who had complained about this teacher, and they found the parent who had asked a question, and they had a representative from that group go and like be like, not only is that true, but here's more. Like I found their comment threads and they were immediately being coached. Like, so when I say that they're being astroturfed, I mean that individuals who raise a question in line with this kind of culture war stuff are being directly like confronted by a person whose job it is to forward this and being given materials and saying, hey, show up at the school board meeting, disrupt. Like, and these are the people who are like yelling about cultural Marxism and things like that. Like, it's really off the wall stuff.
They also have pictures and proof that they like are like involved with legislators, like pictures of Jim Hagedorn being like, love these guys down there and stuff like that. So
yeah. But anyways, moving on from that, like just look into it because it's important and it's in your community. But the other thing that's in this community is your book. Which is really delightful, by the way. I think I would be remiss if we didn't just bring up like I don't read young adult sports literature. I know everyone might be surprised. And I'm also not a basketball star, but I did really. I read Hooper in 2 sittings, and it was just
All right.
It was a really fun read, and it. For anyone in this audience, you might be too old for it, but I enjoyed it, and like it just happens here. Like this book is basically set in southern Minnesota, and if you're from Mankato, like there's like a fist fight at AMC.
There is.
That was so fun. I was like, I felt like I was hooting. Like I was like, there would be a fist fight at AMC.
That's excellent. Yes.
But yeah, no, it's a fun read, and I do suggest it, and it's like totally it's totally bogus that happened to your book, and I hope a lot of people read it on account of that.
Thank you. Yeah. That is it's the only book I've written so far that is really explicitly like Mankato area. Yeah, it does. It has the landmarks. I think Johnny B's is in there. They go in and have some like they have some roast beef.
Yeah,
all right.
They got Patrick's,
just like me.
Holly Eyes. They got AMC. They got the Red Jacket Trail.
Wow.
They do.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fun. It was a little like there's a couple names changed, but it's definitely fun if you live here.
Cool.
But
what's your personal connection to the area?
I've just moved here. I guess in 2010. Took a position in the creative writing program at MSU. And I lived in North Mankato for most of that time. Actually, in Tugas's cabin. If you've been to
I
the
love
log
that
cabin.
place.
Yeah, I lived there for 8 years. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. Tugas has the coolest house. It's awesome.
Sure. I wondered about that. I read on your website. I think it said he lives in a cabin with his wife, and I was like, is that true?
I need to change it. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I lived in that cabin in North Mankato, which was excellent. But then my wife was actually working for Minneapolis St. Paul magazine, and so we were commuting back and forth, and we had kids who were young. But as soon as our kids got old, she took a job at Gustavus. So now I live in St. Peter.
Oh, cool.
And it was. I live very close to where the action takes place in Hooper. Yeah.
So how what was some of the inspiration behind the story? I know Jacob mentioned that it touched on a couple local landmarks and stuff, and then the basketball theme. Is this something that you imagined happens in small towns in this area and wanted to kind of speak to it. Is this like something that was informed from a personal experience you had, or?
Yeah, so I really wanted to pull apart basketball.
Okay.
That was sort of my initial push into it. And I'd written, I played football, and I'd written several books with football at sort of the center of it. And again, it's candy for kids who like it. I don't see myself in books, but if there's sports, athletes will read it, which is ridiculous, even though my books tend to be more about the stuff that kind of happens underneath the sport than the sport itself. I wanted to write about the big time basketball in Minneapolis, and so my first attempt at doing it was just having a kid who lived in St. Peter, a white kid, go and play with black kids in Minneapolis, and begin to learn that he maybe has a pretty easy go of things in certain respects. It was stale. It didn't work very well, and so I had taught English in Poland in the 1990s, and one of my students was this girl on the Polish national like under 16 team, and she had this like really cool kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger delivery of one-liners that would crack me up. And so I thought, what if I kind of took her coolness and tried to plant a Polish kid in St. Peter who has his own troubles, and then he is the one who goes and plays basketball. So it was kind of a combination of I took this character in Poland and kind of split her in half, and they end up making out with each other, which is the sexual content of the book. And yeah, had this Polish kid go and play with really high level players in Minneapolis, and it was a blast. It was fun, and the kid is funny, and he tries to make jokes, but he doesn't have the timing right. So there's a whole section where he's making jokes and nobody's laughing, and he's trying to he's studying, why is it that
relatable
nobody is laughing. Yeah.
I think the hardest that I laughed in the whole book was like when he was describing his adopted mother's ex, and he says the shit man from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Like I laughed really hard at that.
Good. That's great.
But it is kind of like the book is narrated in English as a second language, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It took me a minute. I was like, is this how young adult literature is written, or is this a second language? So it took me a minute to adapt to that.
This is the other thing is that kids are reactionary. So I've had kids only read the first chapter and then email me and say, "Do you think we're idiots? Do you think that's the way we sound when we talk?" And I'm like, the kid's Polish. He's speaking. He's actually in the course over the course of the book. His sentence structure gets more complex, and and one of his complaints is that people think he's stupid because he's translating at first. And so people don't understand that he actually gets stuff.
So you answered the email, yes.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yes.
I think you're an idiot.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote this book.
I've met teenagers before. I had a coworker who spoke 14 languages, but English was the last of them. So sometimes he was even like doing all this crazy mental gymnastics. And a bunch of our coworkers totally thought he was like slow, and is like, no, that's like the smartest guy that works here by a lot, actually.
Well, and that sounds like a story that students might have some personal experience with too, is like meeting someone from a place different than where they grew up, and needing frameworks to understand how they might be interfacing with reality.
That like my intent with a book, and at the beginning, when I moved my dad grew up in Brazil, and he spoke French and Portuguese and then moved here. And he talked a lot about the just like the way he suffered in learning English, and how much, but he felt like when he came to the US in the 1960s, there was this like support for immigrants that,
Mm.
people were actually excited to meet him. And I think the debates about immigration in the country and the way that our immigrant kids are treated in our schools, from a lot of other kids, not from the administrations necessarily, that has changed in the perspective that, an immigrant is actually a boon to our community. So I that was something that I wanted to talk about, that this is, when you come across a kid who's having a difficult time explaining themselves in a second language, it is not stupidity. It is, they're learning the language.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like literally the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's have you heard that for every language you have the value of another human being. So the guy who's speaking 14 languages, he's worth like 14 of us.
Yeah. Yeah, his story is super cool too. He like was the vet in his village, so then he had to become the doctor when the doctor in his village moved to the city. So then he had to learn like 12 languages in like a year time so he could help all these people. It's a really cool story.
I'm sitting there with Duolingo,
Yeah, me too.
Oh wow. Well, what are there any actions or responses that you're like theorizing or planning with the way that this has gone down? Is there anything you have to do, or you just press tour and call it good?
Yeah, that's I love Jacob's response. And I think, like I said, this is really new to me. I've had people complain about, the F-bomb in books, but having a book banned for political reasons is different. And to recognize, that like you say, it is happening here. And there are, what do they say when they say that teachers are teaching kids to be trans? What is
Oh, grooming?
They say
Grooming.
grooming.
Talk AstroTurf. What you described, that is grooming, right?
Yeah.
When somebody has a complaint against a teacher and a political actor comes in and teaches that person to be wicked.
Yeah.
That's grooming. And so, to be aware that kind of thing is going on in our community, and then to participate in the political process and make sure you're voting your values. That feels like our best defense.
Is there anything else that like we can do as community members or citizens besides like voting for city council and school board to help authors struggling with this right now?
That's, immediately I'm like, well, you should buy the books.
Yes, no, that's a great answer. No, I think that's an awesome answer.
Yeah, and so I do think, if you look at that list, there are the list from Iowa. There are like Jacob said, there are classics on that list. There are new books that are particularly geared to kids who have been mistreated by our system, and I think supporting those authors and supporting people who are doing serious work to protect the health and well-being of our children is excellent. It's a great place to start.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's one story that was kind of getting told before we started recording that I'm wondering if you want to touch back on at all, Jacob. It was like a story about how you'd seen a video of somebody reviewing the book.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if there was anything there, but it sounded interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was just Googling around for the book itself, and there was this really I just typed it into YouTube, and there was this South Dakota, I think it was Sioux City. Their library had these three young Black siblings reviewing the book. And the only thing I thought was really interesting about it is they hated Mr. Doig, and Mr. Doig is the worst. If you read the book, it's no Mr. Doig stands here.
Doig free zone.
Yeah.
But that's a really realistic character. I know a bunch of like I'm gonna save these kids by being an authoritarian, and you will call me sir, and I'm gonna put them into the system. When I was reading the book under the impression that people were racially uncomfortable, I was like, oh, they thought Mr. Doig was the hero of the book coming in Act 2, and it turns out he's just a douchebag.
Yeah, I have to believe that they're challenging it because it's that stuff that makes them uncomfortable.
Mhm.
It cannot be the leg touching and
Yeah.
the very heteronormative kissing that takes place
Yeah.
in that book.
Which
Well,
is
there something to be said about the review process that they've implemented, or is that something?
Yeah. So the other thing was, and this is kind of a big nothing burger in my opinion, is that the people who don't want the books to be read are also not reading the books, and they took the language from the legislation and plugged it into Chat GPT, and Chat GPT helped generate a list of books that had that. So it was a big internet article, like I think Popular Science and The Verve and like all these other people are like, they're using Chat GPT to ban books. But the real story there is that, they used prompts from Republican legislation about getting trans kids out of school as prompts for Chat GPT to decide what books to remove. Like it's classic. It's classic laziness,
Yes.
really. I think it's AI fear mongering there. Like of all the things we should fear about AI, least it's that it's going to make lazy right wing assholes more lazy. Maybe more effective.
Yeah,
like-
lazy and effective. There is something in that.
Wow. Well, is there anything else you would want to make sure we talked about in the podcast, either about the book, its reception, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a couple of years since the book has been out, and like we said, it's kind of exciting that it was newsworthy for a week. I mean, it came out in 2018,
Okay.
and but the I guess I don't know how many parents listen to this, but I would encourage parents to go to public libraries in particular, because I think that they have a little bit more freedom than school librarians. Um, and ask those librarians, hey, what are the new books that are addressing sort of the fundamental political issues and issues of identity in our times, and have your kids read those books, because they're also going to be the spokespeople for I guess pursuing truth in a decade or a couple of decades from now. So go be an active participant in your child's life, but not in trying to protect them from books on the other side.
Yeah, if you want to help inform the conversation, maybe seek out the ones that you would want them to be exposed to.
Yeah.
Because I think too, that's probably part of the challenge, is that parents feel like they're having this decision made for them. And so if you wanted to be proactive about something like that, I'm sure that you could find your version of propaganda or informative and interesting content.
Yeah, I mean that's it's our only defense against this stuff is to be activated, right? And we have to care as much about it as the people who are trying to hinder our freedoms. Freedom, just basic freedom of expression and freedom to like seek truth. Yeah, I mean, it's a call to myself too, because I'm a lazy ass.
Well,
Yeah.
the other thing, the thing that's really bizarre about this whole thing to me is that I would imagine if you want to be such like a culture war parent, like why wouldn't you just follow your kid's school curriculum and read it? Like just read the curriculum, and then when something comes up, be like, actually no, we shouldn't listen to immigrants, and Mr. Doig is the man, and like this book is dumb, like just like that seems more effective in training your kid than obviously isolating them from any kind, like, because you're gonna see if you're isolated, the world is gonna smack you in the face at some point in time.
That's a really good conversation, right? Instead of getting rid of things that you find offensive, train your kids, right, to poke at that stuff and to make decisions about it rather than hide them from it. Because if you mean, we were all kids and you went to rotten.com. I mean,
Mhm.
your parents probably never suggested that you do
No,
that.
they didn't. I don't
Yeah.
think they ever knew what it was, and it doesn't exist anymore, to my knowledge.
Yep.
Yeah. That stuff, I'm sure, has ended up someplace.
Yeah.
Or,
It's not gone.
Yeah, it's
that's-
just you can't get to, that's like not on the surface level web anymore.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
think.
yeah.
Um,
But having being provided with challenging intellectual information is excellent for your kid, because then they have to think about it, and
Yep.
they have to
It's
have
probably
conversations about it.
a
Right?
great way to build like strength or resolution or something when it comes resolve when it comes to making decisions about some of the stuff that is like easy to come by and more of a problem. If you've got like a history of dealing with these things in like in a comfortable setting of a school or something like that, where you're having these conversations, that seems like a great way to build, strength and figure out how to handle some of that stuff.
So, what is the fear that that is like being addressed by these bands, that the kids, just in being, in my case, the kids are going to notice like that the main characters enjoy making out, so they're going to want to make out. But in different books where there might be like more sexual content, that they'll want to experiment in with that kind of thing, or if it's political content that they're going to become, that the parent will have lost control over the sort of like ideological bent of the child. Um, that that's it. That's the fear.
I don't believe it actually. I don't believe most of the fear at all. I think that most of these people who are writing this type of legislation and things like that are either like actually genocidal towards trans people. They hate them and they want them to not exist, or they're like muscling for position within their in like increasingly right wing parties
Totally
tendencies towards that. So like, you write this ambiguous bill that says really very little and just broadly makes people like us live in fear to like express how the world works,
Especially when there's like no actual data that these people are in danger to anyone but themselves if they aren't listened to. And so it's like there would be data there to support them if they genuinely like had those feelings. So it makes it pretty clear to me that it's like just general hate on top of like trying to get the good graces of someone.
That's just what it is. That's what it is now. I believe that trans issues and immigration issues are where this election is going to take its. People are going to take their stand there, and I mean, I feel like on the other side, there's there's going to be a lot of talk about how we're going to handle abortion in the future too. But it is those are the hot topic culture war issues. They want to chop off the T. And I don't think it's going away. I'm horrified by how transphobia has become publicly acceptable in almost every space I can imagine.
Absolutely.
And if you're a trans person listening to this, I support you.
Yep.
I hope that you are safe and not in Iowa.
Transphobe, come catch these hands.
But yeah, I think that's what it is. I think it's a political football, because it is difficult to imagine, like, what is that's what I say every time. I don't meet a lot of folks who are, trying to tell me that they don't want to have abortion rights, because in Minnesota it's pretty popular to have them. But when I do meet someone who's critical of that, I say, well, how will you carry women to term? Like what will you do when a person becomes pregnant, and like how are you going to force that individual to have a child
and guarantee quality life of the child?
Yeah. Well,
that's outside of the scope of the project.
Yeah.
But it's not, because in Louisiana they just forced a sixth grade girl to have their rapist baby.
Yeah.
Like it just
Oh, yeah.
happened. It was like front page Time news,
Ugh.
and like that's where they're at down there. Like,
Mm.
and you know she's going to school with that baby. You know, whatever. Like it's horrifying. You know, to imagine, and that's exactly what they said wasn't going to happen. You know,
Yep.
but here we are.
Well, do we want to leave it on that note, or is there somewhere we can take it?
Hooper was nice.
Good book.
It is. And I do want to reiterate that it has some, you know, it's got some politics and stuff in it, but it's really it's a very sweet, funny book. So yeah. Pick it up.
Get the book.
Read Hooper. I mean, I really went through it with a fine comb, and I think I highlighted like 8 paragraphs.
Yeah.
You know, it just it's whatever they're saying it is.
It's not.
It hardly is at all.
Buy Hooper. Buy banned books.
Mm-hmm.
These books are too hot for Iowa, folks. Get yours now. No, but for real, yeah. Do your own. Look into the reason these things are being banned, and don't just trust that they're getting banned for the right reasons.
Yeah. And, what's your socials? You want to plug your socials and your website? And
Yeah.
get a good sign off here.
I'm at just geoffherbach.com or gjherbach.com. You can, either one works for a website. Geoff.Herbach on Facebook and Geoff Herbach, one word, on Instagram. And if anybody friends me, I'll start posting stuff because I'll feel a responsibility.
Yeah. Love it.
Yes.
And that's Geoff, Geoff.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. I
you.
appreciate.
Yeah. Thanks for coming and
appreciate you,
talking to us.
shining a light on it, and it's been an excellent conversation.
Thanks.